And I now have the pleasure of introducing our first panel session. I'd like to start by welcoming up Antony Firth from Historic England, who will be speaking to us about the significance and value of historic structures in the marine environment. Antony, take it away.
Thank you very much.
You're going to want to just click one more and you should get your slides.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So thank you, Kate, for that great introduction. Wanting me to busily rewrite what I've been writing, yeah. Because there's so many really nice points in there to pick up on. That point about shippers sailed, nice to see the clam gardens too, and that point about narratives, and that contrast there between preserving history and innovation. It's something that we do all the time. So yeah, I'm Antony Firth, I'm Head of Marine and Coastal Heritage at Historic England, and really grateful for this opportunity to present to you this morning. So, just looking for a clock. Never mind, we'll go. So I'm going to focus on two broad forms of historic structures, buildings that were constructed in the marine environment and intended to be in their current locations, and wrecks which now form structures in the marine environment but were not constructed for that purpose or intended to lie where they now are. As Kate mentioned, people have been building structures in the marine environment for thousands of years. Many historic structures are still in use, and they provide vital infrastructure and facilities. Those structures are predominantly coastal, in shallow water, often with elements in intertidal areas and above water. They're often constructed in diverse forms of materials, and there's a bit of a contrast there then with the in their environmental characteristics, which are different to modern forms of construction quite often. And one of the things where there's a slight danger is the work that looks at ocean sprawl and the predominance of artificial structures on coastlines, for example, doesn't necessarily take into account those different characteristics of historic structures, for example. Now, and again, Kate mentioned this, historic structures were usually intended to influence marine processes and make them more amenable to human uses of the sea. It's not accidental that they have an impact on the environment, that's their purpose. And as a consequence, the marine environment in the vicinity of historic structures has been changed by those structures, often over long periods of time. And the presence of those historic structures means that much of our coastline has itself become an artifact, and has been so for many centuries. So wrecks are artificial structures that came to rest on the seabed unintentionally, ships and aircraft not intended to sink or crash, but in doing so they become part of the environment. They vary widely in their character, locations and depths. Distinctions can be drawn between those with major metal elements, such as hulls, boilers, engines, cannon, and those made predominantly of wood, which in UK waters tend to be less prominent on the seabed. Although not intended, wrecks also change the marine environment, often in ways that encourage marine flora and fauna, and the presence of wrecks also influences patterns of human activity, which may also be positive for the marine environment. However, not all wrecks are benign, especially where they encase pollutants such as hydrocarbons and munitions, and there's growing concern about the unstable legacy this causes. There are very high numbers of wrecks around the UK because of our seafaring history and difficult waters. The intense conflicts of the 20th century also caused two major injections of steel into our seas in 1914-18 and 1939-45, and these may provide insight into the future of more recent structures. The presence of wrecks is a distinctive characteristic of UK seas, but their implications for environmental status are generally ignored. So historic structures, buildings and wrecks form part of the UK's historic environment and are often regarded as heritage assets. Many are protected through marine planning and may also be subject to heritage designations or other statutory protections. So there's a whole range of those which we deal with, and on the conservation principles here, that's the document, the approach that we use to do that reconciling of conservation and change. How do we make those things happen? We're doing that all the time in the context of development. If you think of any urban environment filled with historic buildings where change is happening. So we're doing that all the time, and conservation principles helps us do that. assets at sea are protected because, as on land, they embody the legacy of our predecessors that we have a responsibility to pass on to future generations. Historic structures in the marine environment enable us to appreciate lives and experiences very different to our own, and they provide insights that other historical sources do not capture. Historic structures are often highly significant, and significance is a measure, the way we use it is a measure of importance and relevance that helps determine how they're handled in law and policy. But significance is not just a product of age. Structures from the recent past can be regarded as significant, including where aspects of that past may be unpalatable and challenging. This is also true of industrial heritage, which generates phenomenal public interest and engagement. And the structures that are the principal focus of this conference are already being considered as heritage, which should not be surprising. The technological, engineering, and industrial achievements of offshore oil and gas, offshore wind, and marine renewables, and the experience of individuals, families, and communities that are embodied in those structures are receiving attention from the heritage sector and from the public, and this interest is likely to increase. So Historic England, who I work for, is the government statutory advisor on the historic environment in England, including Waters Off England. Heritage is a devolved matter, so there are parallel public bodies for heritage in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Our statutory responsibilities are to secure, so far as practicable, the physical preservation of heritage assets, to promote public enjoyment, and to advance knowledge of the past. Important here that there are all three elements there. It's not just about stopping things from changing. That public enjoyment and advancing knowledge are equally integral to our duties. And we deliver these responsibilities through various legal, policy, financial, and information mechanisms. We are, of course, driven by the public benefits of heritage itself, but often we're also promoting the contribution that heritage makes to other environmental, social, and economic objectives. So I'm going to step away from the heritage values of historic marine structures and consider their other benefits. Historic structures, whether their presence is intended or not, generate a range of benefits beyond heritage. In terms of ecosystem services, I have in mind here their provisioning and regulating services rather than the cultural ecosystem services, which they also have. Many of the ecosystem services of historic structures are rooted in the role of these structures as habitats, with high levels of abundance and diversity, especially where they contrast with surrounding substrates. The number and distribution of historic marine structures probably has networks effects beyond those individual assets. The value of historic structures as habitats is understood practically by commercial fishers, sea anglers, recreational divers, and so on, who flock to them, basically. But such value seems relatively little studied or monitored, at least in UK waters. And historic structures also play a regulating role, offering protection to surrounding habitats from their physical presence, or from the laws and policies that apply to them, as flagged by Jenny Hickman and colleagues. RECs contribute economically and socially to fisheries insofar as they are focused for certain forms of commercial fishing and are likely to play a role in the life cycles of some commercial fish stocks. Similarly, RECs and historic built structures are a major focus for sea angling, contributing directly to that sector. Same is true of the economic and social value of recreational diving, where these structures give rise to distinct habitats that are appreciated for their wildlife as well as their history. A key further source of benefits is the access that historic structures provide to the marine environment. Whether you're fishing from a jetty, walking along the prom to a beach, or launching a paddleboard from an old harbour, historic structures play a massive role in enabling access to blue space and to the benefits that blue space generates for people. Our capacity to draw any benefit from UK seas is largely dependent on structures and places built by our predecessors. Hence, the economic and social value of historic marine structures is substantial, though again, little examined. I'm just going to a quick advert for our Missing Pieces initiative, which is going to have a campaign in July on seaside heritage, which is where we basically go out to the public, ask them to take photographs of designated assets and say why they find them interesting. And we're focusing on seaside for the holiday season this year. So watch out for hashtag seaside heritage and put in your photographs of historic monuments at the coast. As suggested already, there's been relatively little direct work in the UK on the environmental, social and economic value of historic marine structures, which is perhaps surprising given how numerous they are and the degree of practical engagement happening every day. This blind spot in research and policy may be due in part to the lack of quantification of the number, distribution and character of historic marine structures. And I'm very pleased to introduce, therefore, some new work that we're doing that will contribute to their quantification and characterization. Although its primary purpose is to speed strategic and scheme-specific decision-making relating to offshore wind, our MDE Heritage Accelerator project, which is funded through the Crown Estate's OEC programme, will significantly improve our evidence for historic structures, especially wrecks and related debris. The project is capturing the results of archaeological interpretations of geophysical surveys prompted by offshore development over the last 20 years. The data will be uploaded to the Crown Estate's Marine Data Exchange, but also to our National Marine Heritage Record, which coincidentally is being extended from the 12-mile limit to the full extent of the UK marine area off England, and also undergoing a major refresh of its underlying architecture. It means that within 2 years we'll have a much richer record of historic structures on the seabed. So I'm going to start wrapping up. I'd like to encourage you to think about the structures discussed over these 2 days in terms of their heritage value. This may seem odd for such recent structures, but they embody an important part of our story in Scotland and across the UK. Our host, the National Museum of Scotland, is already adding the material culture of oil and gas and marine renewables to its collections, and I'd encourage you to visit their Energize gallery on level 5. For our part, Historic England is already advising and publishing guidance on 20th century energy infrastructure. We already do documents on gas holders and power stations and so on. Physical conservation is not an option in many of those cases, but there are still things that we can do to realise those heritage values. We support the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority's development of its own heritage strategy. And in terms of heritage value, I'd like to point you towards the government's development of the Culture and Heritage Capital Framework, which builds on the natural capital approach, and to our own work on the environmental, social and economic value of heritage, which we bring together in a whole set of research called Heritage Counts. We're also keen to better integrate the contribution of heritage assets to sustainable management of the marine environment. We're pleased to be working with Natural England, the Rememory Partnership, Yorkshire Marine Nature Partnership, the University of Plymouth and others to examine the contribution of heritage to marine nature recovery, but we're starting from a low base. Historic structures, both built structures at the coast and wrecks further out, are a key characteristic of UK waters that have shaped and continue to shape UK seas. Although they warrant attention as integral components of our marine environment, they are a blind spot in marine environmental evidence, monitoring and policy. Hopefully this is changing, and I'd welcome your thoughts on enabling historic structures to play a more direct role in delivering sustainable management of UK seas. Thank you very much.